Maid's daughter shouted to stop a lunch. What was found saved a life. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's dive into today's incredible story. This takes place in a high-end restaurant, the kind of place where everything feels like it's carved out of luxury. Chandeliers hung from the ceiling like diamonds suspended in midair, casting soft, golden light over tables lined with fine china and crystal glasses. The air smelled faintly of fresh flowers, and the quiet murmur of conversation was punctuated by the clinking of silverware and the soft footsteps of waiters who moved with practiced grace. At the center of it all sat a man known for his wealth and influence, a billionaire entrepreneur whose name was synonymous with success. He had built an empire from the ground up, and today, he was hosting a private lunch for a select group of investors. But what he didn't know was that this lunch would change everything for him. At the back of the restaurant, in the kitchen, a young girl stood nervously, her hands shaking slightly as she adjusted the apron around her waist. She was just the daughter of a maid, barely 10 years old, but her sharp eyes and quiet demeanor made her a keen observer of the world around her. She had been asked to help clear the tables, to serve the guests without being noticed, to remain invisible in a world where the wealthy and powerful ruled. She had learned long ago that it was safer to stay out of the way, to avoid drawing attention to herself. As she moved from table to table, her mind wandered. She had always felt out of place here. The expensive clothes, the fine dining, the sparkling glasses of wine, it was all so foreign to her. She had grown up in a small apartment with her mother, who worked tirelessly to support them both. They lived paycheck to paycheck, struggling to make ends meet. The life of luxury she saw in the restaurant seemed like a distant dream, something that didn't belong to people like her. But that was before the lunch started. The moment the billionaire sat down at the table, the atmosphere shifted. He was a powerful man, commanding the attention of everyone around him with just his presence. He was used to getting what he wanted, and today, he was focused on closing a big deal with his investors. As the meal went on, he joked and laughed with the people around him, enjoying the attention. But in the kitchen, the young girl had noticed something. She had overheard snippets of conversation from the staff, whispers about a dish that had been prepared for the billionaire, a special entree that was meant to be the highlight of the meal. The staff had been told to make sure everything was perfect, but as she listened more closely, she realized something wasn't right. She had seen the chef handling the ingredients earlier that day, and she had seen him make a mistake, something that no one else seemed to notice. A small detail, but one that could be dangerous. She couldn't explain why, but something inside her told her that the billionaire was in danger. She knew she had to act, but she was terrified. What if they didn't believe her? What if she was wrong? She had no choice but to speak up. With her heart pounding in her chest, she ran into the dining area, shouting as loud as she could. "Stop the lunch. Don't eat that." Her voice cut through the room like a knife, causing everyone to stop mid-conversation and turn to stare at her. The billionaire's face was one of confusion and disbelief. He had no idea who this child was or what she was talking about. But the atmosphere in the room had changed. The once calm ambience was now charged with tension. The young girl pointed to the dish that had been served to the billionaire, her voice shaking as she explained what she had seen earlier. The staff exchanged nervous glances, unsure of what to do. It was a moment of silence before the billionaire finally spoke, his voice low but calm. "What are you saying?" he asked, his brow furrowed. The girl repeated herself, detailing the mistake she had witnessed, explaining how it could have led to a deadly outcome. At first, no one believed her. They thought she was just a child, making a scene for no reason. But then the chef was called over, and the dish was examined. What they found shocked everyone. The dish had been contaminated with a toxic substance, something that could have caused serious harm. The billionaire stood frozen, his face pale as he realized the gravity of the situation. If it hadn't been for the young girl's warning, he might have eaten the meal without a second thought, and the consequences would have been dire. In that moment, the power dynamics in the room shifted. The once untouchable billionaire now found himself humbled, grateful to the young girl who had saved his life. The staff, who had once treated her like an invisible servant, now looked at her with newfound respect. She had proven that no one should ever be underestimated, no matter their status or background. The billionaire thanked the girl and promised to make things right. He realized that true power didn't come from wealth or status. It came from the courage to stand up and do what was right, no matter the cost. As the silence in the room settled, the young girl, still trembling, watched as the billionaire's face went pale with shock. The tension in the air was thick, every eye fixed on the child who had just saved the life of the most powerful man in the room. The billionaire slowly stood up, his hands trembling slightly as he wiped the sweat from his forehead. He was used to controlling every situation, but now, for the first time, he felt utterly powerless. His voice broke the silence, though it was barely more than a whisper. "How could I have missed something so crucial?" he muttered, still in disbelief. He looked down at the plate in front of him, the same dish that could have cost him his life. The room, once filled with laughter and chatter, now felt suffocatingly quiet, as if everyone was holding their breath. The staff, who had previously treated the young girl as invisible, now watched her with a mixture of awe and disbelief. The maid's daughter had become the center of attention, though she hadn't intended for this moment to unfold. She had simply acted on instinct, following the whispers in her heart that told her something was wrong. The chef, who had been called over to inspect the dish, was now nervously talking to the staff, instructing them to double-check all of the food prepared for the remaining guests. No one had seen the mistake except for the young girl, and yet, it had almost cost them everything. The billionaire turned back to her, his eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you," he said, his voice hoarse, almost as if the words were difficult to form. "I don't know how to repay you for this." She looked up at him, her eyes wide and unsure of what to say. She was just a child, after all, but in that moment, she felt something she had never felt before: recognition. For the first time in her life, someone was acknowledging her, seeing her not as a servant or invisible, but as a person who had the power to make a difference. She didn't know how to respond, so she simply nodded, her lips pressed together in a small, shy smile. The billionaire glanced around the room, his mind racing as he processed what had just occurred. He had never been one to believe in fate or destiny, but now, looking at the young girl, he couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. He had been saved, not by money, not by power, but by a single act of courage from someone who had nothing to lose. He turned back to the guests, who had been watching the exchange with wide eyes. "This," he said, his voice now steady, "this is a reminder that we should never judge anyone based on where they come from or what they have. True value lies in the actions we take and the choices we make." He paused for a moment, allowing his words to sink in. "Today, I learned a lesson that will stay with me for the rest of my life." The room was still, the weight of his words hanging in the air. The billionaire then motioned for the young girl to come forward. "Come here," he said, his voice warm. "You have saved my life today, and I want to make sure you're rewarded for your courage." The young girl hesitated for a moment, unsure if she should step forward. But something in the billionaire's tone made her feel that it was okay. She walked toward him, her steps slow but steady. As she reached him, he smiled and placed a hand on her shoulder. "You are a very special young lady," he said, his voice full of sincerity, "and I will make sure the world knows it." The young girl stood there, still processing the enormity of what had just happened. She had come into this room as a maid's daughter, invisible and unnoticed. But by speaking up in a moment of danger, she had changed her life and the lives of everyone in the room. The billionaire turned to the rest of the guests, a new sense of purpose in his eyes. "We will make sure to support her education, her future," he said, "and give her the opportunities she deserves." As the room erupted into applause, the young girl, still stunned, felt a warmth spread through her chest. For the first time, she felt like she mattered. The applause continued to echo in the grand room as the young girl stood, still uncertain about what had just happened. She had never experienced anything like this before. She had always been invisible, always in the background, but today, for the first time, she was seen. The billionaire's words felt surreal, like something from a dream. She had always known her mother worked hard for them, but she never imagined that one small act of courage could change everything. As the applause slowly died down, the billionaire turned to her again, his eyes filled with warmth. "Come with me," he said. He led her to a quieter corner of the restaurant, away from the bustling crowd. There, he pulled out his phone and made a quick call. I want to set up a scholarship for her, he told the person on the other end of the line. A full scholarship. I want her to have the best education, the best opportunities. This girl deserves more than what life has given her so far. The young girl's heart raced as she tried to comprehend what was happening. A scholarship? She couldn't even begin to imagine going to school in a place like this, surrounded by people who lived lives so different from hers. But the billionaire wasn't finished. I also want to offer your mother a permanent position in my company, he continued. She's been loyal, hardworking, and she deserves a better life, too. The young girl's eyes widened. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. She had never dreamed that her mother's hard work would be recognized like this. She had always feared that they would remain stuck in their modest life, forever struggling. But now, it seemed that everything was changing. Thank you, the girl whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. You don't have to thank me, the billionaire replied with a smile. You saved my life today. The least I can do is make sure you have the future you deserve. As they stood there, a sense of disbelief still hanging in the air, the billionaire placed a hand on the young girl's shoulder. From now on, no one will ever underestimate you again. I promise you that. Over the next few weeks, things began to change rapidly. The young girl's scholarship was finalized, and she was enrolled in a prestigious private school. Her mother was given the promotion, a new office, and an income that would lift them out of their financial struggles. Their lives were no longer defined by the limits of their circumstances. They were no longer invisible. But as the girl started her new life at the school, she quickly realized how different everything was. The students came from wealthy families, and their lives seemed so far removed from hers. At first, she felt out of place, uncomfortable in the world of designer clothes and lavish parties. But as the days passed, she began to adapt. She focused on her studies, determined not to let her past define her future. The scholarship wasn't just an opportunity for education. It was a chance to prove to herself that she belonged in a world she had always thought was out of reach. Weeks later, she returned to the billionaire's company, this time not as the maid's daughter, but as someone who had earned her place. She stood in front of the billionaire's office, her heart pounding with excitement and nervousness. She had made it this far, but she knew there was still so much more to prove. The billionaire greeted her with a proud smile. You're doing great, he said, his voice filled with genuine encouragement. But I know you have even more potential. Don't ever let anyone tell you that you can't achieve greatness. You have the strength to do whatever you set your mind to. The young girl nodded, her heart swelling with gratitude. For the first time in her life, she felt like she could accomplish anything. She wasn't just a maid's daughter anymore. She was a person with a future that was wide open, full of possibilities. As the days passed, the young girl's life continued to transform in ways she had never imagined. She settled into her new school, a place filled with wealth and privilege that once seemed so far out of reach. But now, she was one of them. The scholarship had opened doors she never thought possible. The students at the school were kind, but it was clear that they came from a different world, one where expensive cars and vacations to exotic places were the norm. She felt like an outsider at first, unsure if she belonged. But the billionaire's words echoed in her mind. You have the strength to do whatever you set your mind to. That was the encouragement she needed. She worked hard, kept to herself, and focused on her studies. Slowly but surely, she began to find her place. As her grades improved, so did her confidence. One afternoon, after a particularly grueling exam, she walked out of the classroom and was surprised to see the billionaire waiting by the school gates. His presence was a stark contrast to the typical luxury cars lined up outside, but to her, it felt like a sign. You're doing well, he said with a smile, his voice warm and reassuring. I've been following your progress, and I'm proud of what you've accomplished. But remember, this is just the beginning. She felt a rush of pride at his praise. The man who had given her a chance, who had saved her and her mother from a life of struggle, was still watching over her. He had been more than just a benefactor. He had become a mentor. Thank you, she replied, her voice steady but full of emotion. I won't let you down. The billionaire nodded, his eyes gleaming with pride. I know you won't. But remember, no matter how far you go, never forget where you come from. It was a lesson that stayed with her, one that grounded her even when the world around her seemed to be shifting. Weeks turned into months, and the young girl's confidence grew. She started taking on more challenges at school, joining clubs, and even helping others who were struggling. Her reputation began to change. She wasn't just the scholarship kid anymore. She was someone who had earned her place through hard work and determination. The girl's relationship with her mother also deepened. No longer was their life defined by financial struggle. They had a home now, one that was comfortable and secure. Her mother, who had worked tirelessly as a maid for years, was now in a position of respect at the billionaire's company. She had her own office, her own team to manage, and a future that looked far brighter than it ever had before. The young girl was grateful, but she never let the success go to her head. She knew that her rise wasn't just about luck. It was about the choices she had made, the people who had believed in her, and her own resolve to never give up. One day, as the young girl sat in her room, reflecting on the journey she had taken, she realized that her life had changed forever. She had been given a chance, and she had seized it with everything she had. But more importantly, she had learned that the true measure of success was not in wealth or status, but in the ability to overcome adversity, to stay true to yourself, and to help others along the way. The young girl knew that the billionaire's influence had played a major role in her life, but it was her own determination that had driven her forward. And as she looked out the window at the horizon, she knew this was just the beginning of her journey. The future was wide open, and she was ready to embrace it with open arms. Months passed, and the young girl's transformation was nothing short of extraordinary. She had settled into her new life with a sense of purpose that she had never known before. With each passing day, she worked harder, not just at school, but in every aspect of her life. Her grades were exemplary, her confidence blossomed, and her once shy demeanor had given way to a quiet strength. Her mother's success at the billionaire's company was a daily reminder of how far they had come. No longer did they have to worry about rent, food, or the constant fear of financial insecurity. They had a future now, one filled with endless possibilities. But the girl knew that success didn't come without challenges. The pressure of maintaining her scholarship weighed on her at times. She felt the weight of her mother's sacrifices, the expectations that she would one day rise to even greater heights. Still, she pressed on, determined to honor the opportunity she had been given. One evening, while walking home from school, the young girl was approached by one of her classmates, a girl from a wealthy family who had never paid much attention to her before. "Hey," the girl said, her tone almost hesitant. "I've been meaning to talk to you. You're really smart, and I've noticed how hard you work. I was wondering if you'd help me with my math homework. I've been struggling." The young girl was taken aback. This was the first time someone from her school had approached her like this, asking for help rather than offering to tutor her. "Of course," she replied, surprised by her own willingness to offer assistance. Over the next few weeks, they studied together, and the young girl discovered something remarkable. Her classmates, once so distant, were starting to see her in a different light. She wasn't just the scholarship kid anymore. She was someone they could turn to for guidance, someone with knowledge, and more importantly, someone who had proven herself. Word spread, and soon, others were asking for help as well. The young girl's influence was growing. She had become a symbol of determination, not just for those who had everything but for those who, like her, had nothing. The change wasn't just in how others saw her, it was in how she saw herself. One day, as she walked into the billionaire's office for a meeting about her future, she felt a sense of calm that had been missing in her life. She was no longer the nervous girl who had been thrust into a world of privilege. She had earned her place here. The billionaire greeted her with a warm smile. "You've been doing great," he said, his voice full of approval. "I'm proud of you. I know you're capable of much more, and I want to help you achieve it." The young girl nodded, her heart swelling with gratitude. "Thank you for everything," she said, her voice steady. "I'm ready for whatever comes next." The billionaire leaned back in his chair, looking at her with a mixture of admiration and pride. "I know you are, and I think it's time we take the next step. You've shown that you can rise above your circumstances, and I want to give you the chance to prove that you can take on even bigger challenges. The world is waiting for you, and I believe you have the power to change it." The young girl felt a surge of excitement and fear. This was the moment she had been waiting for. She had spent so many years feeling like she didn't belong, like she wasn't worthy. But now, with the support of those who believed in her, she knew that the future was hers to shape. As she walked out of the billionaire's office that day, she didn't just feel like a young girl from humble beginnings. She felt like someone who could accomplish anything. The journey had just begun. The young girl's life had taken an unexpected turn, and with every new opportunity, she began to realize the depth of the journey she was on. Every day felt like a new challenge, but it was a challenge she faced with determination and confidence. The scholarship had opened doors she never thought possible, and now, with her mother's new position at the billionaire's company, the world seemed full of promise. As she continued her studies and took on more responsibilities, she began to understand the true meaning of the words the billionaire had said to her. The world is waiting for you. The young girl had always dreamed of success, but now, it felt like success was within her reach. She began to apply herself to new projects, taking on leadership roles in school clubs, and offering help to others who struggled academically. She didn't just want to succeed for herself. She wanted to be an example for others who felt like she once did, like they didn't belong, like they didn't have a chance. One day, while attending a leadership seminar at her school, the young girl was asked to speak on a panel about overcoming adversity. As she walked to the front of the room, she felt a wave of nerves wash over her. She had always been shy, not used to speaking in front of large groups. But as she looked out over the audience, she remembered the billionaire's words again. You have the strength to do whatever you set your mind to. Her voice was steady as she spoke, sharing her story of how she had gone from being the maid's daughter, invisible and unheard, to standing before them as someone who had earned her place. It wasn't easy, she said, her eyes scanning the room. But it was worth it. I didn't get here by accident. I worked hard. I stayed focused. And most importantly, I never gave up on myself, even when others did. The room fell silent, and the young girl could feel the eyes of the audience on her. She wasn't just telling her story, she was inspiring others. The panel ended with a round of applause, and she walked off the stage with a sense of accomplishment. But even as she basked in the success of that moment, she knew there was more to be done. That evening, she received a message from the billionaire. I've been watching your progress, and I'm impressed, he wrote. I want to introduce you to some of my colleagues. There are opportunities for you here that could change the course of your life even further. The young girl could hardly believe what she was reading. This was it, the moment she had been working for. Her dreams were no longer just dreams. They were becoming reality. Over the next few weeks, she met with business leaders, philanthropists, and innovators who had the power to shape industries. She wasn't just the scholarship kid anymore. She was being treated as an equal, as someone with potential. Her mother's position at the company had also continued to grow. She had been given more responsibilities, and with that came more respect. They had come so far together. It wasn't just the material wealth or success they had gained. It was the respect, the dignity, the knowledge that they were worthy of all that they had worked for. As the young girl sat in a meeting with some of the top minds in business, she realized that her journey was just beginning. She had achieved so much already, but there was still so much more to learn, so much more to accomplish. With the support of the billionaire, her mother, and the strength she had found within herself, she knew that she could achieve anything. And as she looked around the room, surrounded by people who had once seemed so far out of her reach, she smiled. The young girl had come a long way. From the maid's daughter, but she wasn't done yet. The future was wide open, and she was ready to take it on. The young girl's world had shifted in ways she never thought possible, and now, she was on the verge of something even bigger. Every day felt like a step toward her future, but the weight of her ambitions was growing heavier. With the billionaire's mentorship, she had gained invaluable knowledge, but now, as she prepared for the biggest challenge of her life, she wondered if she was truly ready. It was a cool autumn morning when she found herself in the billionaire's office once again. This time, however, the conversation felt different. The air was charged with anticipation as he looked at her with a proud, yet serious expression. You've come far, he said, his voice steady. But it's time for you to take your next step. I've arranged a meeting with some of the most influential figures in the business world. It's your chance to show them what you're capable of. Are you ready for that? The young girl felt her heart race. She had been working toward this moment for so long, but now that it was here, she wasn't sure if she was prepared. She had always doubted herself, even when others saw potential in her. But this was different. She had the knowledge, the skills, and the strength to succeed. I'm ready, she said, her voice steady but filled with a determination that surprised even herself. The billionaire smiled, his eyes reflecting the trust he had in her. "Good," he said, "because this is your chance to prove to the world what you're made of." A few days later, the young girl stood in a sleek conference room, surrounded by some of the most successful and influential business people in the country. The room was filled with polished suits and confident voices, all discussing strategies, profits, and investments. She felt small, but not in the way she once had. The confidence she had gained over the past few months gave her a sense of purpose that filled the room. She was no longer the shy, invisible girl in the back. She was here to show them all that she belonged. As she listened to the discussions unfold, she couldn't help but notice how many of the ideas being presented were shallow, driven by profits rather than people. It was something the billionaire had taught her. Success wasn't just about the bottom line. It was about making a difference. And that's when she knew what she had to do. When her turn came to speak, she stood tall and confident, addressing the room with a voice that commanded attention. "I believe that true success comes from creating something that benefits everyone, not just those at the top," she began, her words carrying a weight that silenced the room. "We need to think beyond profits. We need to focus on sustainable solutions that help communities, protect the environment, and create opportunities for those who are often overlooked." The room was still for a moment, and she could feel the eyes of everyone on her. She wasn't sure how they would respond, but she knew she had said what needed to be said. As she finished, she met the eyes of the billionaire, who gave her a nod of approval. She had done it. Her words had made an impact. The silence was broken by the sound of clapping, and to her surprise, the people in the room were genuinely impressed. They weren't just applauding her bravery. They were recognizing the depth of her insight, something that many of the seasoned professionals had failed to see. The young girl had turned the tables. She had shown them a different way to think about success, one that valued people over profits. The meeting continued, but the young girl's words lingered in the air. As she left the room, she couldn't help but smile. She had done more than prove herself to the room full of business leaders. She had proven to herself that she was ready for whatever came next. The billionaire had always believed in her, but now, she was starting to believe in herself, too. Her journey was far from over, but she had already come so far. The future was hers to shape, and she was more determined than ever to make a difference. The young girl's life had taken another unexpected turn, one that she never could have imagined when she first arrived in that grand restaurant, invisible and unsure of herself. Now, as she walked into a new chapter of her journey, she felt a deep sense of gratitude and pride. She had proven to the business leaders that her voice mattered, and in doing so, she had gained more than just their respect. She had earned her place in the world she had once only dreamed of. However, with new opportunities came new challenges. The billionaire, who had been her mentor and guiding light, had asked her to take on a project that would push her to her limits. It was a bold new initiative, one that would involve not just business strategies, but social responsibility, and finding sustainable ways to help those who had been left behind by society. "I'm giving you this project because I believe in you," the billionaire had told her. "It's time for you to create something meaningful, something that will have a real impact on the world. It's a chance to show that business can be about more than profits." The task was daunting. The young girl had spent so much time focusing on her own growth, on proving that she belonged in this world, that she hadn't fully realized the weight of the responsibility that came with success. But she wasn't about to back down. This was her moment. She started by doing extensive research, meeting with communities in need, and gathering a team of passionate individuals who believed in the same vision. They focused on creating programs that could give back to those who were struggling, the underprivileged, the homeless, the ones who had been overlooked. The project wasn't about charity. It was about empowerment, giving people the tools and resources they needed to build better lives for themselves. As she worked on the initiative, the young girl found herself growing even more into her role as a leader. She had learned how to make tough decisions, how to motivate her team, and how to overcome the obstacles that came with trying to change the world. One evening, as she sat at her desk, reviewing the progress of the project, she received a message from the billionaire. "I'm proud of the work you've done," he wrote. "You're not just changing lives, you're changing the way people think about success. Keep pushing forward." His words were a reminder of just how far she had come. It wasn't just about the project anymore. It was about the person she had become. As the project began to take shape, it caught the attention of media outlets, and soon, the young girl was invited to speak at conferences, sharing her vision of a world where business and social responsibility went hand in hand. People were listening to her, and her voice was reaching further than she had ever thought possible. But it wasn't the praise or recognition that mattered most to her. What mattered was seeing the impact of her work, seeing people's lives change, hearing their stories of how the programs had given them a second chance. It was a humbling experience that grounded her in ways nothing else could. One day, as she was walking through a community center that had been funded by her project, she was approached by a young woman who had been a part of the program. "I just wanted to thank you," the woman said, her eyes filled with emotion. "You've changed my life. I have a job now, and I'm going back to school. I never thought this would be possible for me. But because of your work, I have hope again." The young girl felt a lump in her throat. This was why she had started this journey, to help others, to make a difference. It was in that moment that she realized that the success she had achieved wasn't just for her own benefit. It was for everyone who had been overlooked, everyone who had been told they weren't enough. She had the power to change lives, and that was worth more than any amount of money or recognition. The young girl had come so far, and yet, she knew her journey was just beginning. There was still so much to be done, so much to change. But with each step she took, she grew stronger. She wasn't just the maid's daughter anymore. She was a force to be reckoned with, and she was ready to take on whatever came next. As time went on, the young girl's life continued to unfold in unexpected and beautiful ways. She had accomplished more than she could have ever dreamed of, but what was most important was the impact she had made on others. Every day, she woke up with a sense of purpose, knowing that the work she was doing was changing lives. Her journey had taken her from being the invisible maid's daughter to becoming a powerful voice for change, a symbol of resilience and determination. But even as she basked in the success of her accomplishments, she knew that the true reward wasn't in the recognition or accolades. It was in the people she had helped along the way. The billionaire, who had once been her mentor, now considered her an equal. They often met to discuss new projects and ideas, and she had grown into a trusted partner, someone whose opinions were valued and whose voice carried weight in the business world. But despite all the success, she had not forgotten where she came from. She continued to work on the initiative that had started it all, the one that focused on empowering those who were overlooked and underestimated. The program had grown, reaching more people every day. She traveled across the country, meeting with communities, learning from their struggles, and finding ways to help them build better lives. It wasn't easy, but every challenge was a reminder of why she started in the first place. She had a mission, a responsibility, and a deep understanding of what it meant to uplift others. One afternoon, as she sat in a meeting with her team, discussing a new project that would provide education and job training for young adults in underserved areas, she paused for a moment and looked around the room. There were people from all walks of life, different backgrounds, different experiences, but they all shared one common goal: to make the world a better place. She realized that this was her true legacy. It wasn't about the wealth she had gained or the recognition she had received. It was about the change she had sparked in others. Her mother, too, had come a long way. From the days of struggling to make ends meet, she had become a role model for others, a symbol of perseverance and hard work. She had worked her way up in the billionaire's company, earning respect and admiration from her colleagues. Their lives had been transformed, and they were no longer living in the shadows. The young girl's story had inspired countless others. She had shown them that no matter where they came from, no matter how difficult their circumstances, they had the power to change their lives. She had proved that anyone could rise above their situation with determination, courage, and the willingness to fight for what they wanted. As she stood in front of a crowd at a charity event, speaking about the work she had done and the people she had helped, she realized that this was just the beginning. The journey she had started years ago, as a young girl with nothing but a dream, had led her to this moment. And now, she had the opportunity to create even more change, to inspire even more people, and to leave a lasting impact on the world. As the event came to a close, the young girl walked outside, feeling the cool night air on her face. She looked up at the stars, knowing that her journey wasn't over yet. There was so much more to do, so much more to give. But for the first time, she felt a deep sense of peace. She had come so far, and no matter what the future held, she was ready to face it with the same determination that had carried her this far. The young girl was no longer just a maid's daughter. She was a force for change, and her story would continue to inspire generations to come.